1994 Linares Tournament. Karpov versus Topalov. Benoni Defense. With these exchanges, Topalov obtained a 2-1 pawn majority in the center and a semi-open c-file. In return, Karpov has piece-based central control and, thanks to the c-pawn, a pleasant space advantage. Topalov continues with e6. In positions where Karpov has the pawn on c4 after c3, the bishop usually develops along the h1 to a8 diagonal. These two pieces coordinate well to put pressure on the queen side. Knight on c6, bishop on g2, bishop on c5. If the knights were exchanged immediately, this would help increase the opponent's central control. So Karpov retreats his knight to b3. Topalov brings his threatened bishop to e7. In these types of positions, you usually want the bishop on e7 anyway, so Topalov gets what he wants and forces the opponent's central knight onto a more passive square. Karpov continues his development with knight to c3. White castle short, black castle short, and then d6. Topalov wants to develop his bishop from d7, but the pawn on d6 becomes backward and will be a constant target for Karpov throughout the game. Karpov plays bishop to f4 and immediately increases the pressure on the pawn. To prevent further pressure, Topalov plays knight to h5. Karpov responds with e3, attacking the knight and offering the bishop pair. The knight captures the pawn, the f-pawn recaptures on e4, and then the other f-pawn captures on e4. Topalov gains the long-term bishop pair and slightly damages Karpov's pawn structure, but Karpov is about to complete his development. Another advantage for Karpov is the semi-open e-file and d-file. Topalov plays bishop to d7. Karpov plays queen to d2. Topalov's choice of queen to b8 looks a bit strange, because when we move the queen, we usually want the rooks to connect. However, queen b8 both supports the pawn on d6 and prepares a6 and b5. Karpov responds with rook from f1 to e1. Then comes g6. What is the idea behind g6? Topalov is not satisfied with his bishop on e7 and wants to move it to a more active square. If the bishop moved immediately, it could run into an annoying knight situation. In response, Karpov plays h4, aiming to create a counterattack. This is usually seen in opposite-side castling positions, but here Karpov also has an extra f-pawn. Topalov prepares a 6 and b5. Karpov plays h5. Topalov plays b5. The h-pawn captures on g6, the h-pawn recaptures on g6, and Karpov continues dynamically with knight to c5, aiming to gain an advantage before the opponent can consolidate. That bishop is very important for Topalov, because it is tied to the pinned knight. The d-pawn captures on c5, the queen captures on d7, and the knight comes under attack. Topalov responds with a tactical defense rook to c8. If bishop captures on c6, there is the intermediate move rook to a7. Karpov does not want this, and instead sacrifices brilliantly with rook captures on e6. Topalov plays rook to a7, but Karpov continues with rook captures on g6. The f-pawn captures on g6. Then queen to e6 check, king to g7, and bishop captures on c6. Karpov remains extremely active. Topalov wants to play rook to d8 and rook to d6. Karpov plays pawn from c4, captures on b5. Topalov plays bishop to f6. Karpov responds with knight to e4, cutting off the d6 square and attacking the bishop. Under this much pressure, taking the pawn on b2 makes little sense. Topalov plays bishop to d4. Capturing the pawn on a6 with the rook is not good, because bringing the queen to the 7th rank would become dangerous. Topalov plays queen to b6. Karpov plays rook to d1. And then Topalov captures the pawn with the queen. Rook captures on d4. Rook captures on d4. Queen to f6 check. King to g8. Queen captures on g6 check. King to f8. Queen to e8 check. King to g7. Queen to e5 check. King to g8. Knight to f6 check. King to f7. Bishop to e8 check. King to f8. Queen captures on c5. Topalov desperately plays queen to d6. Queen captures on a7. Queen captures on f6. Bishop to h5. Rook to d2. b3. Rook to b2. King to g2. Topalov resigns. A rook versus a bishop and 5 pawns is far too much. A perfect game by Karpov.